beautiful soul family, and welcome to the Walk On Podcast, the podcast where I try to demystify spirituality, personal growth and healing, and whatever else I feel like talking about. I'm your host, Britt Cannon, and this week's episode is called Remember Who You Are. It is inspired by I've talked about this in the past couple episodes, but my return to therapy after probably like 9 years away, and just realizing how far away from myself I have become. Anyone who's like dealt with trauma knows that it separates you from your true self. It covers up the real you with the you that's made of like coping mechanisms, just trying to survive, right? And things that we think are our personality. Like, I've heard toxic people say this all the time, where it's like, this is just who I am. Like, take it or leave it. This is just who I am. But what they're saying who they are is just behaviors that they have developed to feel safe in their own body, in their own life. And I think a lot of us have these kinds of coping mechanisms. It's like people pleasing is a good example of this, where like people really identify with being people pleasers, but really naturally, if you were raised in a way where you were unconditionally loved and positively regarded, where like you got to really express your autonomy and be an individual, you would naturally form boundaries. You would naturally individuate, and it wouldn't be such a struggle to like assert who you are and just be yourself and tell people how you really feel. And it wouldn't be such a struggle to feel like you need to earn love. You would just understand that you were loved. If you've ever met someone with like a secure attachment as someone who doesn't have a secure attachment, it's like the wildest adventure. You're just like, wow, you're really out here confident. You really know your worth. That is wild, dude. And it's like, that's how it's supposed to be. So, to identify with people-pleasing patterns, that's not who you are. That's something you developed that you can actually heal. Like, you can actually correct that behavior in yourself and learn how to be someone who just understands you are worthy of love because you're alive. And it's a struggle. It's hard to do, but it's just true, And sorry, my nose is a little stuffy. It's like, must be the freezing cold weather we're having in New York, combined with like the dry heat that we have in the apartment. But like, my sinuses are fucked. But I've been realizing, I haven't talked about this much because it's just kind of fresh and a really sensitive kind of topic. And I don't want the other person that was involved, like, I don't want to hurt their feelings or like put them on blast or anything. But I was like recently, like in the past, like 5 or 6 years. I mean, actually, that's not true. It's before the past 3 or 4 years, the previous 4 or 5 years, I was in probably the most toxic relationship I've ever had in my life. And it was very confusing because it wasn't a romantic relationship. It was a platonic relationship. And it's just, I was dealing with one of the most like toxic, cruel, and emotionally abusive people I've ever met. And I really struggled with this because it's someone who I really loved and trusted a lot. And it took me years to even admit that abuse was going on. And after I got myself out of that situation and I came to live with my partner, it was so calm and stable here. And I've talked about this before, how sometimes like when you're in the thick of it, it's really hard to understand the gravity of the situation and how it's affecting you. It's not till after it's over, when you're safe from it, that you can really start to unpack it or like feel the effects of it. And I was just a mess. Like, I was just a wreck. I felt like I didn't know who I was anymore. My confidence, which I had worked so hard to build, like, decades of work to get in touch with my confidence, to feel good about myself, to feel good in my body, to feel like I was worthy of taking up space, to feel good about my art, to feel good about my career path. Just everything kind of came crashing down, and it was like destroyed. Like I had none of it anymore. I didn't know how I felt about things. I didn't know, like, I don't know. I was questioning like whether or not I was a person who was in my integrity. Like I was really hanging on by a thread, honestly. And like there were obviously, when we're healing, like we're not creating something new. I say this all the time. We're uncovering what has always been there. And I think like I had done so much work before I got deeply into this situation that there was a good foundation there. Like I had been healing for some time. I really knew myself. I had really found a way to get in touch with my confidence. I had really like rebuilt my life from the ground up in a way that was like self-loving and healthy and stable. And then I just sort of got hit by this like emotional Mack truck, and it didn't destroy everything, but it did undo a lot of work. And a lot of times when I was in this relationship, I was sort of like, I can handle this. These are like famous last words, right? If you ever find yourself saying, I can handle this, like, this is not ideal, but I got it. It's like famous last words. Like, spoiler alert, no, you probably can't, and it's okay. But I was just like, you know what? I feel good. I'm like on my healing journey. I know how to take care of myself. I know how to unpack trauma. Like, this person is complicated and we have a complicated relationship, and like there's addiction and mental illness and like emotional instability and all this triggering between us, but I got it. I can handle it. And I was under the kind of, let's call it arrogant delusion that I was impervious to like further harm. Like that I could remain a solid entity and keep loving myself and keep being stable and healthy, even if I was continuing to be abused. And it's kind of a mind fuck now, because it's like, I got away from my family because I realized that I wasn't capable of like protecting myself within that toxic dynamic. But this relationship kind of slipped through the cracks, and here I was, you know, being like, I mean, I feel like I'm being emotionally abused. I feel like I'm being extremely triggered, but like, I can just process this. I can just find my way out of it. And to be honest, I was like stoned out of my mind for most of this time. I was just like doing the best I could to be checked out. And I didn't realize I was doing this. I just thought like, I'm a stoner. Like, it's so fun. And I still smoke weed, but like a fraction, a tiny fraction of what I used to, what I was doing at the time. Like, I was so high all the time that I was like always extremely sleepy, like kind of disoriented, just kind of zoned out, you know? And I didn't realize that I was doing it to cope with the harmful situation. And it was like I couldn't fully process it. So when I came to stay with my partner during quarantine and there was so much stability, I was just like, oh, actually this did affect me. And I've spent the last 4 years living with her, talking things out and eventually deciding to get back in therapy. And then I'm talking it out there and just peeling back the layers and layers and layers of like, not just damage this person did or this relationship did, but the damage, like the parallels to the damage I experienced in childhood. And just all these reminders. And anyone who's been in an emotionally abusive relationship, like, you know the feeling of sharing space with someone who has like intense contempt for you, who finds everything you do annoying, who may even be like disgusted by you or embarrassed by you. Like, it's such a tense way to live, to have someone have those feelings for you, even if they're unspoken, like even if it's just in the vibe or in the way they treat you. It does so much damage to feel like a burden or to feel annoying or to feel like someone would rather not have you around, or they have to like escape you or whatever, especially when you're doing your best to be a loving force, to be patient, to be kind, to give them the benefit of the doubt. Anyway, so I was stuck in this cycle where no responsibility was taken. If I like tried to bring up the issues that we were having, they would just kind of bring up issues that they had with me, like to kind of counteract or like distract or deflect. So I could never get to the bottom of it. And this just like whirlwind of confusion just took over my life. And honestly, untangling it has been as hard as untangling my relationship with my family of origin. And it turns out I needed help to do it. And what has been the most amazing thing about the therapy sessions I've had is that I feel myself coming back into myself. I remember who I am, and having like these positive mirrors of the good parts of me, instead of living for so long, and not just in this relationship, in most of my relationships, living for so long with like only negative mirrors. It's like, when you go like to the mall or something and it's fluorescent lighting, like it's not good, and you're like in a department store and you pass the cosmetics mirror and you're like, ugh, like you didn't wear makeup or something, and you're like, yikes. Harsh lighting, not good. I don't want to be out here looking like this. It's like that. Like sometimes people hold up a mirror to you and it's like those glamorous movie star lights around this like beautiful mirror, and you're like, wow, she's beauty and she's grace, And sometimes certain relationships only reflect back to you like the negative parts. And I think it's really important for all people, even people who've been toxic to other people, to be reflected back like the positives of who they are. It's really important in the process of remembering who you are to acknowledge the good parts of yourself, the beautiful parts, the loving parts, the good qualities that you're proud of. Part of like the self-love practice that I engage with is one that is like inspired by the process of like redirecting your thoughts in a more positive direction. So like instead of sitting around being critical, you compliment yourself essentially. I'm actually going to do this week, and if you would like to do it too, it's a great practice. But I'm just going to sit down and like make a list of all my good qualities, all the things I love about myself, and put it up on my desk so that I see it every day and look at it and remember and like integrate. I'm generous, I'm patient, I'm kind, I'm intelligent, I'm funny, I'm like weird in a great way. I am a good friend. I'm very loyal. I'm like resilient as hell. I'm strong. I'm emotionally intelligent. Like I love hard. And these are all things I love about myself. And so I encourage you to engage with this practice as well and put it up somewhere where you see it all the time so that you can be reminded every day of those good qualities. Because I think a thing with toxic relationships is the other person, the person who's in control, has a certain stake in keeping you distant from yourself, keeping you distant from your intuition, keeping you out of alignment with your own confidence and self-love, because a self-loving person won't stay in a dynamic like that. If you're being loving towards yourself, you will understand when something is hurting you and you'll remove yourself. At least like once you reach a certain level of self-love, you're just like, why would I deal with someone who treats me worse than I treat myself? Like that's not for me, And so there's a certain investment in keeping you in that space where you like can't really feel your intuition. You prioritize the person's voice over your own in your own head. So like you'll hear the things they say to you. You'll hear their criticisms. You'll hear their gaslighting instead of your own inner knowing. And the way that you feel about yourself and the ways that you move through the world. And I didn't realize that that I had done that. It's such a humbling experience to think that you've come really far on your healing journey and then to encounter a relationship like this and to realize that like you fell right back into it, baby. Like, like it was nothing, you just like fuck my healing, fuck my drag. Like, I'm just gonna do this all again wholeheartedly. And it's just, I mean, it sounds like I'm like belittling myself for it, but I'm really not. I have a lot of grace for myself, and like, I love the part of me that gives people the benefit of the doubt. I love the part of me that's patient. I love the part of me that like loves flawed people. Like, I just love the totality of the human experience. I think it's like a miracle on earth. The ways we're all weird and unique and like and come to life, come move through life and encounter each other with our own unique traumas and like hangups. And I even think it's beautiful that like some people's really mesh and vibe and some people's really repel and like are challenging for each other. And I embrace like the whole journey of that. Even if there are people who I'm like, no, thank you, I would not like to encounter that anymore. And there's some people who are like, yes, 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 give me more of this. I love it all. Like from an objective sort of bird's eye view standpoint. But I don't know. And I forgive myself for like getting mixed up in situations like this because I'm just doing the best I can, you know? And you are too. So maybe forgive yourself also. But digging out the true self, the self that's buried underneath the trauma, is such an emotional process. From where I am now, like looking back 10 years ago, and I thought, and this whole time I've been thinking this, I was like under the impression that like my trauma had ended. You know, I was like, okay, my trauma ended the first time I went into therapy when I blew up my life. I left my relationship. I ended all my friendships. I quit the business I was starting with some friends. I like moved into my truck. I left my hometown. I went no contact with my family. I moved to New York. And sure, like I was homeless for a little bit and like I lived in this scary boarding house and I was like living with someone who had addiction issues and mental health issues and someone who was pretty emotionally abusive. But like my trauma ended a long time ago and I'm no longer being traumatized. Now that I'm in therapy again, I'm like, oh wait, I've been I've been being traumatized this whole time. Like there was 10 years ago trauma and then 20 years ago trauma and now there is like the last decade trauma. And that's what I'm unpacking now. And so I think it's just like, you know, we can't really see and stop our patterns until we're aware of them. And part of becoming aware of them is experiencing them and the consequences of them over and over and over again. And unfortunately / fortunately, like it is what it is. This is the way we are. And like, this is the way it plays out. We sometimes need to experience something many times before we learn the lesson. You know, you're not going to be good at it right away. And I've said this many times on this podcast that like, I have noticed in myself that like, I'll make a decision. Like I'll be like, I am going to never be in another toxic relationship again. And then the universe kind of throws me a toxic relationship to be like, are you sure? And it's like a little test after you make the declaration. And sometimes like I haven't really learned the lesson all the way through and I need to get caught up in it for a little bit. Hopefully each time I'll get caught up in it a little less. Hopefully each time it will like do less damage because I'll get the heck out of there. But, you know, you can only bite off a piece of some of the really tough lessons at a time. And you need the karma of like the mirror of another person in order to really see it. And again, from a bird's eye view, like that's the gratitude that I can find for every relationship I've been in, like toxic or otherwise. Like, thank you for showing me something about myself. Thank you for helping me along my journey of healing by, at the very least, showing me what I don't want to experience anymore. So, remembering who you are is about getting to know yourself. It's about accessing the divine infinite wisdom of your inner child who knows everything about you, who was the purest, most real version of you, especially the one that like hadn't yet developed those coping mechanisms. And it's challenging because if you were in an abusive family dynamic or one that had a lot of control going on or whatever, the things that were real about you might have been punished out of you. You may have been discouraged from being strong or like bossy or mouthy or telling the truth, or being needy or being emotional or being queer. There's so many ways that parents dissuade individuality in their kids. And so you're taught like being that is wrong. And so you learn to be a different way. But it ends up being more like wearing a mask than like molding yourself into something you're not. These coping mechanisms are not sustainable because for so many reasons, like they keep us out of intimacy, like because you're not being the real you, because you think the real you is unlovable, you have a hard time like really connecting and being close with others. It keeps us out of feeling belonging, which is so necessary for healing and like having a happy life. Like belonging is a miracle. It's the most like life-changing soul like healing. It's like just like medicine to feel true belonging, but you can't feel it if you're not being real. And if you've ever had the sense of like being in a group of people, especially people who should love you, who should know you really well, and still feeling lonely, it's probably because of that, because you don't know how to be vulnerable, you don't know how to be authentic. And that's because we're not taught how. Like, it's not your fault. And that is part of remembering who you are, like remembering what was squeezed out of me, like what was discouraged in me, what was inherently me that I like loved about myself that was so free and effortless that I'm having to like work really hard to get back in touch with, or that I've been having to work really hard to repress. It reminds me a lot of like masking in autism. Like you don't do the things you need to do to emotionally regulate because they're considered unacceptable by the neurotypical world. And so whether it's rocking or like chewing on something or vocalizing or whatever, like people don't approve of it and it's seen as like not normal or whatever. And so it's conditioned out of you, and then you just go through life always overstimulated and suffering because you can't do the thing, or you feel like you can't do the things you need to do to regulate. And I think people do this all the time. It's like what customer service voice is. It's like what code switching is. It's just trying to like modify yourself or dull yourself down enough to fit in like a cookie cutter societal role and like be acceptable to like as many people as possible. This is why artists who like really try to be like commercially appealing and try to make art that is like I don't even want to use the word accessible, because accessibility is like those artists who try to have mass appeal. They tend to be kind of bland, right? Because there isn't a lot of authenticity or vulnerability in their art, because if you're too real, you're going to offend people. Or not offend isn't exactly the right word, but like you're just going to turn some people off. So if you toe the middle road and you just like try to keep it as bland as possible, you're not going to turn anybody off, and then you can make more money. It reminds me of like, when I think of my people-pleasing days where like everybody liked me, it was very rare that someone would be like, I don't like that person, because I was pretty bland. Like I was pretty non-offensive. I just like didn't have any boundaries, didn't really speak my mind, like was just nice to everyone. And it was nice in a way. Like there was no drama. I didn't ever have to be the villain in anyone's story. Like I didn't have to piss people off with my boundaries. I wasn't being my real self, so I wasn't really ever rejected. And then I realized that if everyone likes you, if you're never, like, if no one hates you, if you're not offending anyone, like, you're probably not being real. Because once you start being authentic, like, you're going to rub people the wrong way sometimes. Not everyone's going to love you. Not everyone's going to agree with you. And if you're really, like, out here trying to make a difference in the world, even with just like how you interact with people, by telling the truth, by speaking your truth, by standing for something, you're gonna occasionally push some buttons and people are going to have reactions. And I think part of maturing, part of remembering who you are is like really being okay with that. And honestly, it really does. My dog is shaking in the background. It really does kind of liberate you and make life a little easier to navigate. It's, torture to move through life kind of worried that everyone's going to get mad at you instead of just like doing you and like having conflict like a normal healthy person. You're just like terrified that someone's going to hate you or think you're a bad person or whatever. Like all that pressure keeps you playing small and keeps you out of your authenticity, which keeps you out of belonging, because the only way to experience intimacy and belonging is to show up real. So on the road to remembering who you are, get in touch with your inner child. Do positive affirmation work. Like write down that list of qualities that you love about yourself and refer to it every day. Like sit down and make it a practice and be like, I am strong, I am kind, I am emotional, like I am sweet, I am honest, I am passionate, and just tell yourself these things instead of being like, I'm annoying, I'm a burden, I'm not smart, I'm a failure, I'm ugly, like whatever it is, those repeating sort of drill sergeant, like usually the voice of a toxic parent or toxic person in our lives, like navigate your way out of that, like just readjust and try to teach your brain to move in a more positive, self-loving direction. And before you know it, like you don't have to do this practice anymore because you're just embodying those things. You just know this about yourself. And I think a lot of times when people who are not confident see someone being confident, especially someone who, like, if you look at them and you're like, that person is lower on the totem pole of society than me. This reminds me of like in college, this really mean little shit looked at this girl who was like about my size, right? Wearing like a mini skirt and a little crop top or whatever. And, I thought she looked fabulous. I love anyone who's confident enough to wear whatever they want, like body type aside. And like just someone who's comfortable in their skin is like a beautiful thing. And when I used to see those things, I would be like, oh my God, like I want some of that. Like I didn't have it. And when I saw it, I was like, that's amazing. Like, how do you get there? But sometimes people who aren't confident see that and they're like, that person, my favorite / least favorite thing is when someone's like, you must have a lot of confidence, or like, I have a good body and I wouldn't wear that. Like, how dare you feel secure to wear that when like I wouldn't wear that and I am like on the hierarchy of society, like considered more beautiful or more worthy of wearing something like that or having that confidence. And it offends me that you have it and I don't, right? But you stop being in those patterns when you are like living your truth. You don't need to be so judgmental. You don't need to cling on to even like systemic or societal constructs of like what beauty is, or like, that kind of Christian morality we get into where you get into like slut shaming and like sex negativity and needing to feel moral superiority. You just don't cling to those kinds of things anymore because you're just solid and secure in who you are. Remembering who you are is like a revolutionary act. It's the key to liberation. It's what allows you to think for yourself, to feel secure in your beliefs, to go out and like fight the good fight against the powers that be who want to keep you on a big level separate from your truth. And I think part of the reason why these cycles play out in our interpersonal lives is because they're set up from the top and they trickle down into our interpersonal relationships. But like, capitalism doesn't benefit from you knowing who you are. It doesn't benefit from your own confidence. It doesn't benefit from like contentment or inner peace. And so there's a lot that goes into making sure we don't have the time, the energy, the resources to get there, because people who are secure in themselves, who are like cool with everyone being who they are, isn't going to be like chill with being exploited. Nobody's going to be identified with the role they play. No one's going to be telling themselves they earn everything they have, and that like nobody, if someone doesn't have it, it's because they haven't earned it. Like this like moral implications of like wealth or doing well in society wouldn't exist, because people wouldn't need to buy into those things. They wouldn't need to like idolize those things and worship those things like they do, because having a secure sense of self means that, and this is like the bottom line of the whole thing, like you are the universe. I have this poem. it's you are the universe, simple and complete, complex and all-knowing. You are the universe, constant, cognizant consciousness, infinite life, infinite love. Like, that is you. There is literal stardust in your body making up who you are. You carry the ancestors, like you carry the DNA of your ancestors in your DNA. Like, you are ancient, you are always, you are infinite, you are abundant. Like, you are love incarnate. And isn't it amazing to be made of stars? Like, isn't that a blessing? And it's just accessing your divinity. And that's what Christianity has, like, I mean, their whole deal is that like God is external to you. And we tend to externalize our own divinity and like project it onto stuff all the time, onto money, onto like material things, onto pop stars, politicians, religious leaders, like, a big white man in the sky. And that's why it's so profoundly freeing to recognize that it's in you, that it's actually in all of us, that it's in trees and the sky and the ocean and like your partner and your dog and the plants in the house. It's just like, it just is. It's all around. It's in the atoms that my hands are moving through that are the same atoms that are in me, It's beautiful and it's humbling, and it really keeps you, I mean, not to get too heavy with it, but it keeps you in a place of acceptance about death and like the cycle of life. It keeps you able to access that bird's eye view that gives you perspective, like exactly when you need it, that helps you not take life so seriously, but also that like inspires extreme presence and gratitude for every moment, that makes you want to show up and live, because you understand that this physical life is precious, and that like this home, this body, I have an episode called Your Body, Your Home if you want to hear more about this topic, but like this vessel that your soul chose for this lifetime is perfect. It's exactly who you were supposed to be in this lifetime. And your most profound job is to sweep out the cobwebs and the dust of all the trauma, all the bullshit that other people put on you, all the filters that we view ourselves through, that society downloaded into us, and just be as you are. You know, the perfect, like, I don't know, perfect has a negative connotation, but I mean, like, you are exactly who you're supposed to be. All you have to do is remember that. We're going to take a quick break for some ads.